Dearth of diverse representation in the media is an embroiled debate as old as Gus. I'm sorry, Godfather Gus. Please don't bury me, please. Now, the only thing worse than being underrepresented is being misrepresented. But before we get into my best, Malcolm Jamal feek the signifier impression and discuss the perpetuation of problematic Jamaican stereotypes in Cool Runnings and in Luke. Let me big you up real quick, cause listen, you warm up my heart like day old Wendy's burger on last week's video. Your comments them touch me more than Epstein has touched people them Pickney my youth. Now watch the video all the way through and submit comments as sacrifice for the almighty algorithm. And no matter if they're ephemeral or pistols, you will get a reply while supplies last. Now the more cynical set may clamor in my comments. Foreign, Haiti just had an earthquake. TNT had one oil spill, and you here chatting about Bushmasters' inaccurate usage of patois? Bet your mother scunt. Listen, hey, let me regale you in a real life example that exemplifies why not only do minorities need representation in the media, but accurate representation, because this is exactly what happens when you do not have it. I was born in New York while my old man worked at the UN, so I'm what Trump would call an anchor baby. I spent most of my life living where you vacation. The Bahamas, arguably the best Caribbean country there is. This is not a biased take at all. But when I moved to Iowa to study political science, listen, that's the first time I truly encountered real white people. Man, you know, there's a white population in the Bahamas. In fact, we call them Conky Joes because they white like the conch skin. And despite racism manifesting itself in wealth disparity and privileges that the black majority don't have, the white and black population get along seamlessly, to the point where I really wasn't racially conscious until I came to the States. All I wanted to do was study political science and take over the university as well. You know, simple thing. But I totally underestimated the tacit racism of Iowa. Cause I gotta check my privilege right now. I's a big black man with a beard. Ain't nobody gonna run up on me calling me the N-word. Cause that could be me and this could be them. The racism here manifests itself in nuanced ways like, man, I can't wait to see you touch down against Alabama this season. Big man, I ain't no football player, you know. You couldn't pay me to be no football player and be used as a battery ram and then get CTE by age 30. Because they assume that the only reason that I could be here is if I play in sports or athletics. There's absolutely no way that this big burly black man with a beard is here for anything academic, right? And I love my Iowans. While I love them and the slow pace of this one-horse town, a good number of them ain't seeing farther than a farm. I might as well tell you. Some of my colleagues have never met a black man before. Some of them said from the small towns they never met a black man before, let alone a Bahamian. So in my introduction to international politics class, this white you come and sit down right next to me. All these seats, you know, but this boy won't sit down next to me. I swear it's a lecture hall, you know, but this white boy won't sit down next to me. This man go on in the bag and immediately pull out one big long Jimmy John sandwich. But you know one thing about white people is they love cheese and bread and some deli meat. They go crazy for some cheese and bread and deli meat. My lord, there's like 10 sandwich shop inside this college town, but not one fried chicken joint. I know this stereotypical, but I want some fried chicken. I have to drive a whole hour to the nearest fried chicken Popeyes or KFC. You think that makes sense? In a college town? But sorry, that's for another video. You know, I like to get mad at things in groups because it's just efficient that way, you see? So yeah, me and the white boy sitting next to each other. Let's just call him Andrew for the time being, right? And me and Andrew sitting down, the professor asked us a question. He say, give me an example other than the United States of a federal system, a country that has a federal system. So I shoot my hand up like the overachiever I am, and I said, Nigeria. This boy looked me dead in the eye and asked me, what tribe are you from? I look at this boy like the grandmother going to Piggly Wiggly in a push cart. I said, actually, I'm from the Bahamas. Then Andrew proceeds to ask me if that's a U.S. territory. I say, soldier, we never been a U.S. territory. Then this man put on his worst Chet Hanks impression. Booyaka, booyaka. And he say, hey, take it easy, man. And within an instant, I realized, I say, you know what? It ain't his fault, It ain't his fault. It's mine. The fact that the Caribbean has been marketed as this playground that only consists of Jamaica is my fault. Cause if you don't tell your story, big man, someone gonna tell it for you and they gonna tell it wrong. You cannot leave it up to other people to get your story right. And that is exactly what happened in Cool Runnings. Picture the thing there. 1993, Cool Runnings, a movie based on a Jamaican bobsled team put on by Disney. So you could already tell where this is going, right? It's Disney. The same Disney that named the crow in Dumbo Jim Crow and characterized the crow as lazy and rude in an obvious likeness to African Americans. I mean, you don't need me to educate you on the myriad of Disney's dalliances. But I do appreciate the fact that they don't try to erase what they did. Instead, they just make an addendum and try to atone for what they did. I can respect that. And I can't believe that I'm saying this, but maybe there's actually something that we could learn from the way that Disney tells history. So Cool Runnings, you have 3 yardies from Kingston trying to go to the Olympics, plus one boy that is literally just push cart. The Reese Bannock falls during the 100mm race at the Jamaican Olympic trials, thus failing to qualify. But he's persistent to realizing his dreams. So Bannock gets in touch with the disgraced American bobsledder Irv Blitzer, who just happens, just miraculously happens to be living in Jamaica after he was caught cheating and disgraced. And after teaming up with some other yardies that also fell in the race and failed the trial, they prepare with Irv to go to the Calgary Olympics. Of course, the natural irony that this entire narrative is hinged upon is that they're competing in a bobsled event, which is hilarious, because it doesn't snow in the Caribbean. It's so funny. So nobody takes them seriously, and instead of, being the underdog story that ends up winning in the end, like, the tortoise and the hare, something like that, they actually crash. So that's a good deviation from popular tropes. Congrats, Disney, big up. And they carry the bobsled to the finish line, yet everyone applauds because they were facing so many odds. The string section swells and everybody feels good at the end of the movie and they just want to hug each other. I'm sorry, I ruin everything because of my jadedness, because of political science, so I apologize for that. 25 years later, Luke Cage was released in the context of the Trump victory, which already is as much as a political statement as Black Panther. And I'm beginning to see a theme in Marvel movies and Marvel series where they're trying to make a lot of political commentary. I don't know if they're doing that for the progressive of good or just to go and rake in some cash off of people who just foam at the mouth at identity politics. The Netflix series was a commentary of the stark absence of inclusion in Hollywood, and the show aimed to portray African Americans from their perspective, which apparently is a wrongfully convicted black man. And what felons typically do after they get out of the bing is that they go work at the barbershop. I ain't gonna lie, they get that one right. I swear to God, like my barber right now is a felon. He was in the pen, and this man know how to straighten up a line. I ain't gonna lie. Only thing is, he trying to go and upcharge to $40 a haircut. And I mean, big man, you cutting out of your basement, man. You can't be doing that, but that don't make no sense. I calling you out publicly, stop that. One of Cage's powers, which quickly becomes apparent, is that he is bulletproof, which is obviously in response to the abundance of black casualties at the hand of police brutality and gun violence. And another power is his super strength, which I already touched on a little bit in this video, but in summary, dark-skinned men have historically been associated with hypermasculinity, of which being strong is a trait of. This is due to dark-skinned men typically being used in fieldwork, whereas lighter-skinned men were typically used in the house. Of course, this stereotype has endured, as evidenced by Luke Cage being a brutish black man and Drake crying while trying to put on his best impression of a Jamaican concierge. The cast of the series is adorned with African and Latin Americans, which is pretty fair and accurate because during my time in New York, it was pretty quotidian to see African Americans, Afro-Caribbeans, Latin Americans. After Cage gets his power due to a scientist attempting to save his life in prison, he returns as the Harlem Hood hero. Now there's 2 villains in season 1, Luke's adopted brother that framed him, and the second one being Mariah Stokes. But the second season introduces us to none other than the Bushmaster, a Jamaican that returned to Harlem to avenge his parents after they were killed by the Stokes family. Now, the origins of Bushmaster's powers is Obia, an Afro-Caribbean spiritual tradition talked about extensively on this channel. I can link it right over there, my G. My lord, I giving you all a summer's reading list of things, but instead of books, it's actually video essays. After many attempts on Mariah Stokes' life, Bushmaster finally kills her, thus usurping her as the head of the Harlem underworld. But Bushmaster eventually dies due to his abuse of Nightshade. While they vary vastly in the terms of subject matter, these 2 works have become some of the most apparent pieces of visual media with Jamaican representation. I had never watched Cool Runnings before preparing for this video, but I've actually heard it referenced in reference to me a million times. Although I am not from Jamaica, Spencer, you inbred goat. I've come to accept that it's probably one of the first impressions and first introductions that foreigners have with Caribbean people, especially Jamaicans. And Marvel, I mean, come on, boy, it's one of the biggest media franchises of this time. Luke Cage is actually the best reviewed Marvel series on Netflix. With over 2 decades between these two works, there's an interesting timeline of how representation of Jamaicans in particular have changed, if at all. Maybe it's a referendum on how Hollywood sees Caribbean culture in a political climate that urges respectful representations of minorities. And given that Luke Cage was produced by people of color, as opposed to a white director in the case of Cool Running, it would behoove the curious mind to inquest as to the differences, if any, BIPOC Americans treat people of color outside of the United States. Because black people outside of the United States is typically treated as the alternative to the default, which is black American. This is due to the United States being the cultural zeitgeist of the world. And despite Jamaica being this little island in the Atlantic, the culture is global, with people all over the world reciting Marley or vibes and boasting Usain's iconic Bolt stance. Yet Jamaicans will still be juxtaposed to African Americans as the alternative, because black Americans are what you immediately think of when you hear the word black and when you think of black people. So the stereotypes that the media uses to differentiate between a black Jamaican and a black American is extremely important, especially when considering the fact that many people unfortunately get their understanding of the world through media. Thus, a boy that been in a barn his whole life could muster up the American audacity to ask me if my country is a territory of his, which is why it is paramount to understand how Jamaican culture has been represented thus far. The most typical representation of Jamaicans is the Rasta stereotype. Rastafarianism is so synonymous with Jamaican culture, to the point where Louis Vuitton used the Rastafarian flag as inspiration for their Jamaican jumper, which they claim was to reflect the Jamaican flag. Rastafarianism started in Jamaica during the early 1900s, I think like 1930s. Puts Haile Selassie, the Ethiopian emperor, as the Black Messiah. The iconic dreadlocks are typical traits, despite not starting in Jamaica. I can link the video up there. Big man, you got your work cut out. They are still closely associated with Jamaican culture. Another trait is Rastaman not eat no meat other than fish, which is meat. But this ain't no intro to Rastafarianism. If you want that, let me know in the comments. The next trope is Jamaicans is bun enough herb, tote much smoke, like, in other words, they use marijuana. This is tethered to the Rastafarian religion yet again, because they believe that the weed itself grew from Solomon's grave. Smoking weed is purported by Rastafarianism as a way to get closer to God, much like meditating under the big tree brings you closer to enlightenment in Buddhism. Marley's meteoric rise to fame also put Rastafarianism on the front stage, but nowadays Rastas have become more style than spirit, with much of the political underpinnings and religious rhetoric falling by the wayside, rendering Rastas in the modern day dreadheads that bun a lot of herb. Now, this carefree insouciance is also employed as a tactic, a tourism tactic, to get tourists to come to Jamaica. A lot of the Jamaican identity, and this goes for a lot of Caribbean countries that have tourist destinations as one of their main parts of their economy, their identity is tied to the fact that it is a tourist destination. So the reason for this jovial spirit is because our culture caters to bringing tourists. Even if you're not a part of the hospitality industry, you're still affected and influenced by it, to the point where most Caribbean people are extremely inviting for people to come and engage with their culture. Furthermore, in the pursuit of tourism is the sexualization of Caribbean culture. Think the dirtiest of dancehall lyrics and the gyration of gigantic bodies. Sex has been commodified in the Caribbean to attract tourists. And a byproduct of this is the abundant prevalence of hypersexuality in the region. It's also an effect of colonialization, because the imperial invaders, I like that. Imperial invaders, alliteration. They needed to warrant the way that they were treating the locals when they arrived. I mean, not arrived, invaded. There we go, imperial invaders. So they did that by seeing these people as sexual, hedonistic, indulgent beings, as opposed to them being white colonists and colonizers, which are more, forward and cultured, civilized. And there the stereotype of the Jamaican gigolo was born. This trope depicts Jamaican men as womanizing, submissive to their own sexual desires. Men that can't think with any other head than that between their legs. And the women as well were depicted as desirable temptresses with voluptuous bodies. This stereotype has been internalized to the point where Jamaican artists themselves sing of these stereotypes. Popcorn boasts of getting gals easily in his song, Get Gal Easy. We get gal easy. Easily. And must I recite any of these Spice lyrics? Me's a gal, me no fight over man. These stereotypes are so ingrained into society that they've taken a life of its own and become reality. And let's not forget the Shotta stereotype. The stereotype that showcases Jamaican men as violent and wicked. And this stereotype has been perpetuated through dancehall legends like Mavado and Bounty Kill, with just a dash of homophobia to just add to that toxic machismo. But the origins of this stereotype came from the violence that Jamaicans had to resort to in order to gain their independence. I mean, looking back at the history, Taki's Rebellion, which I talk about extensively in my Obia video. It was one of the earliest depictions of violence in Obia in the Caribbean. And Shotta's is literally a movie that probably deserves its own video. Thick, let's make something shake. But the idea of Shotta's takes its inspiration from real life situations like Christopher Coke and the Shower Posse. However, one of the most unique trademarks of Jamaicans is patois. I mean, the dialect is spread all across the regions. I mean, in the Bahamas, where I'm from, we put our own spin on patois, but it's also spread all across the world. And I ain't gonna embarrass myself in this video and try to speak patois and then end up sounding like DJ Khaled. But phrases just like wagwan and yaman have pretty much become immediately synonymous with Jamaican culture. All of these stereotypes, good and bad, manifests itself into these two works. Cool Runnings was directed by John Turteltaub, who is a white American. None of the four protagonists have any Jamaican heritage. However, to the movie's merit, they did throw a couple, supporting roles to Jamaicans, good job. Luke Cage, on the other hand, had a litany of directors. However, the casting may or may not surprise you. Drum roll, please. In the case of Bushmaster, you are not Jamaican. Mustafa Shakir, though a Harlem native, is actually African American. In fact, most of these roles were African American. Only like 2 short speaking roles were actual Jamaicans, and that is when they were actually in Jamaica. So in both pieces of media, you had African Americans playing Jamaican. Not only that, but there was no Jamaican involvement at any stage of production or direction. Luke Cage is a show with a main Jamaican antagonist shot in America by Americans. So let's look at the locution, because we've already identified that to be one of the biggest trademarks of Jamaican culture. The portrayal of Jamaican patois in Cool Runnings was absolutely abysmal. These people sounded like Irish men with speech impediments. And I ain't trying to go and get copyright strike by Disney, so guess what? We could do it like this. There's instances where Jamaican characters say morning instead of morning, or derby instead of derby, or father instead of father. But sadly, I expect these accents to sound faked and forced, because they are fake and it is forced. Maybe it's too much to ask a monolith like Disney to shell out some bub to get someone to at least be the cultural expert on set to make sure that something like this does not get to print. Because anybody with a wayward relative from St. Thomas, let alone Jamaica, will be able to tell you that these actors ain't convincing anybody but be flicking Tovin that day from yard. This is literally a story based on Jamaicans with absolutely no input from Jamaica. Jesus, I feel like Adam from YourMoviesSucks.org. It's not that Disney didn't have the budget for this, It's that the Disney executives did not find it important to worry about the cultural integrity and authenticity of this film to hire anybody remotely connected to the island that they are trying to portray. Let's play a game. Every time when you hear "Yeah man" inside Cool Runnings, drink a red stripe, a whole red stripe. See how long it take you to dead from alcohol poisoning. The hackneying of the phrase "Yeah man" is the bane of my existence. And I'm from the Bahamas. Imagine the Jamaicans. Now, remember when I was talking about the Louis Vuitton jumper and how it was red, green, and gold rather than black, green, and gold? Well, good news, they didn't get the flag wrong, and if they did, I didn't notice. But they parodied these colors by making everything these colors. Unnatural depictions of these colors adorned the entire movie. It was garish and it made my head hurt. And while we're talking about visuals, clothing is a very big part of denoting someone's culture. This is evinced by African clothing in the case of Doris's mom. But there was no clothing to denote any type of Rastafarian influence. It's like the man them over at Disney thought that they was just covering the bases by just putting everything in kente cloth. Moving on to the way that the National Stadium of Jamaica was depicted in Cool Runnings. You have to understand, the National Stadium, NJA, meets world standards because it has to host international events. The stadium showed in this film making it look like it was a shack. And that is to contribute to this idea that Jamaica is impoverished and run down and backwards. No innovation, no infrastructure. This stigma is perpetuated with Sanka telling Yule that people can end up in a shanty or a one-room hut. I don't care if you live in a slum or a scheme. Ain't no yardie. They way too proud. No yardie will say that the place that they lay their head is a hot. But I have to acknowledge the fact that they at least tried to show the bougie side of Jamaica by way of Junior's family, instead of making it seem like, everybody just popped down. But they do that just to reinforce these very harmful stereotypes, like the Reese doing a kissing booth as a fundraiser despite having a wife, and even some of the stereotypes that are not negative on the surface value, like Jamaicans are fast and they're good at running. But the problem is that it creates an expectation that all Jamaicans are fast. God forbid that you're not a fast Jamaican, and when you go over foreign, people expecting to race you like you're a damn horse from the Secretariat. Cool Runnings is a prime example of someone telling your story for you and getting it dead wrong. But let's say that was 25 years ago and things must have definitely improved, right? I assume that Luke Cage is gonna be a lot more, accurate to the culture, right? Music plays a big role in culture, as well as in Luke Cage. From soul to boom bap, the streets of Harlem were alive. But music was also used as a mechanism to introduce characters. Night Nurse by Gregory Isaac is played when Claire tends to Luke's wounds. This is the first Jamaican song played in season 1. And apart from the obvious connection of Night Nurse and, Claire playing a nursing role, it also foreshadows that there will be a Yardie influence coming soon. Then lo and behold, Bushmaster comes on the scene with a reggae beat backing him up. Even when Luke Cage goes to the Jamaican side of town, you can hear Jamaican music. The contrast of musical themes continues when signaling the different control that Harlem is under. When Stokes was in control, we heard American music and performances in Harlem's Paradise. But when Bushmaster was in control, Stephen Marley was playing in the club. And of course, when Bushmaster leaves, Redemption Song is played. And that's all good and dandy, but there was one tune in particular that I want to talk about, and that is the original tune made for Bushmaster. When he removes the bullets from his chest, the theme Bushmaster's Bullets is played. And like the other tune, it had a Jamaican influence to it. Only thing is that Ali Shaheed Muhammad and Adrian Young produced this track. And I love Adrian Young. He has a collaboration with Ghostface Killah that is absolute fire. But this was an opportunity to employ one of the countless Jamaican producers so that you could at least have one Jamaican involved in the process. Now one could argue that all the rest of these tunes that we've heard throughout the seasons are Jamaican songs made by Jamaicans. And my retort to that is, who are these tunes benefiting? Because Night Nurse and Redemption Song get enough royalties. These are Jamaican standards. That is not giving back to the culture. That is using the culture to authorize the film and lend some Caribbean cred to the series. It's just like DJ Khaled going back to Jamaica and collaborating with the same Avado and high-profile reggae artists, rather than using his huge profile to break an up-and-coming producer from Portmore, too hungry and starving. And if you think that my voice getting high now, wait until you hear of the bastardization of patois in Luke Cage. You should have seen me when I heard the rumors that there's going to be some Caribbean influence in Luke Cage season 2. I was dead hype, looking like someone she picked me on Christmas Day waiting for a gift to come out of the TV when I watching Netflix. Then I saw Bushmaster. I ain't even gonna call him Bushmaster. Bush Amateur. I saw Bush Amateur on the TV, and then he pull up on the screen, and my man say, "Where's Harlem?" I drop my fork. It ricochets to the floor. My gal paused the thing trying to figure out what happened. I say, "You see that boy? He ain't Jamaican. He may be Jafacan, but he ain't Jamaican." Drake more Jamaican than this boy. A real Yardie would have said something like, "Where Harlem there?" And just the execution of the word Harlem, and the way how he drag out the in Harlem. Like, he coming like this, but it's the flying damn Dutchman talking about I ain't trying to go and push my blood pressure up talking about the inaccuracies, the many inaccuracies in locution that this series has, because I cringe just thinking about it. The very placement of Jamaican representation in this series is akin to the dark-skinned friend trying to support the protagonist in rom-coms. Even worse, actually, I take that back, even worse, because the Jamaican in this case is the villain. The Jamaican represented the dark side of darkness, and the darkness is Luke Cage. Luke Cage is the good black, because, he's the black we could understand. He's the black that we know. I mean, Shades even made a parody of patois when he say he can't understand a word of what these guys are saying half the time. You may see it as pedantic, you may see it as trivial, but language is important. Language, and compound with the lack of authentic rhythms and inaccurate characters, translates to a lack of care and respect for the culture. When you don't respect the culture, you don't care to get the culture right, which particularly hurts when you take into account the fact that these are people of color that are directing this series. And they should know better, because they know what it feels like to have someone telling their story for him. In the 25 years between Cool Runnings and Luke Cage, you tell me what progress was made. And sure, there's plenty of different examples of Caribbean people in media. There are black actors with Jamaican heritage that have made so much success in Hollywood. But the same way that Sidney Poitier is Bahamian, but the majority of you not even know that, the same goes for all of the rest of the people with Caribbean heritage that have just assimilated into Hollywood without anyone knowing. The lack of accurate and authentic representation is a serious issue. A serious issue that people don't take seriously until they realize how much of what we perceive reality to be is dependent on what we consume. So if the boy from the barn only comprehension of Caribbean people is what he saw in Luke Cage, what do you think he could ask me? How you think he could treat me? If a boy from Dubuque, Iowa, only comprehension of black people is what his grandfather used to tell him as far as stories go. Meanwhile, his grandfather is the same one that is turning Casper the ghost at night for his KKK meetings at night. What you think he could think of black people? This thing is real, and a great example of that is this video right over here, where the BBC director of diversity basically said that Idris Elba's Luther isn't black enough because I can save that one for you. Click there. I can see you in that one.